Well, welcome back, everyone. You're in the quarters. Myself, Maggie Williams, and Phil Blows from Wealth Wizards. Now, we've heard a bit earlier from Jordan Petman and from Linda Kennedy McCarthy about some of the sort of high-level data and analytics practice in HR and reward. We're going to drill down a little bit now into some more detail around that, and particularly how it relates to financial well-being. So first of all, welcome, Phil.
Thank you.
I think the way we're going to run today with this is that I'm going to lightly grill you with a few questions, and then hopefully we'll have a few more from the floor during the course of the next 20 minutes or so. So we've promised 6 bits of data, and I'm sure we'll unveil those as we go through our journey. So I wanted to start off with, I guess, the kind of argument that sort of what gets measured gets managed. So before you even get into, or even before you get into the data and dig too deeply into that, is there a structure to the approach of the data you should collect?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much data that you really can pick up, as I'm sure everyone is aware, and you don't want to sort of death by numbers sort of thing. So we try to break it down into 3 general categories. So I mean, the first one is data that diagnoses the problem. There's data around how do we, solutioning, and then it's really sort of benchmarking and performance measurements. And as you sort of go down those 3, the top one is the most broad, and the bottom and the benchmarking is probably the most specific. So, I mean, the top one, when you're looking at, what are my workforce's priorities, that's absolutely key before you get going with any kind of program in this space. So you're looking at quite high-level concepts there. So things like, what percentage of my workforce is looking at getting on the housing ladder? Who's struggling with day-to-day funding, and you can from that sort of, I guess, pull out sort of buckets that each sort of employee might feed into, and that's quite challenging to get that level of insight. And we've often found that the best way to do that is actually through financial education, because and there's a lot of free tools which are out there which you can financially educate your workforce on, look at where they're engaging. So that would be sort of the way you'd start. So you know then, what are my workforce's problems? How can I help them? So the second tier, and sort of digging in a little bit deeper, is really around this solutioning aspect. So as a business, what are the core metrics that I'm looking to improve or measure initially that's going to have a tangible impact on my workforce's financial health, financial well-being? The 3 that we really look at is, what percentage of my workforce is struggling with debt? And then, what percentage of my workforce has got a 3-month cash buffer? You can call that financial resilience. And then thirdly, what percentage of my workforce is on track for what we would classify as a comfortable retirement? And that's a really nice place to start, and then leads obviously into the third category, which is down to benchmarking. So I'm spending all this money on a program. What are the changes in those metrics? So, is what I'm doing in, say, producing something around salary finance, something like that, is it actually having the impact of reducing the overall number of my workforce that are struggling with debt? And we've seen the previous session with the Hyman's Go solution, and they've got a great example of where they've improved the retirement outcomes, things like that. But that to me is the absolute core, because that is what you're going to be reporting back to the C-suite, ensuring that they are, that the spend that you're having has a tangible impact on the workforce. And you can even go further than that to look at things like absenteeism and things like that.
Sure. Well, that sounds great. That all sounds beautiful. But how? And I suppose the first question of that is, when you're talking to providers and third parties that you work with, how do you get the data that you need from them?
Yeah. I think there's a huge, as a concept, if you're going to do this digitally, if you've got a large workforce, you want people to engage with this and sort of give you this information, the first thing you've got to do is make the user experience really, really simple for them. And so for that purpose, what you've got to do is you've got to challenge your providers to try and pre-populate fields that you're going to your employees. So if you've got that invaluable engagement onto some sort of digital medium where your employee is willing to give you this information about their priorities, well, let's not make it difficult. Let's not say, okay, give me an idea about your savings. How much have you got in your pension pot? Okay. Don't make the employee leave that online environment to go and dig out an old dusty pension statement. Pre-populate the field. Get a feed from your provider. yeah, same goes for even just salary, our pension contributions, for argument's sake, being done by salary exchange. You can pull that data directly from payroll. And increasingly we're seeing with open banking, although it's still unproven whether people are willing to share that open banking data in the workplace. When you're trying to work out, where are you spending all of your money at the moment, you can begin to look at sort of APIs with people sort of connecting their bank account with workplace solutions like that. It's really engaging with your suppliers and ensuring that they can provide this information.
Sure. And what sort of questions, if you had sort of 2 or 3 key questions for your providers in that respect, what would they be?
One thing we're always really, that we see is this massive administrative burden whenever HR teams are looking at bringing in new solutions. Is it a manually sort of uploaded and sort of Excel file at the end of each month? So the kind of question I'm asking a provider or a supplier, even before I'm engaging with them, is can we do all this via an API? So everything is pulled directly from your system, pre-populated into my systems, because I'm looking to add these services. I don't want to add to my administrative burden. So that would be one, I think, really core question. I think we're going to increasingly find, and I know there's a whole session on this, so I won't bore people with it, but GDPR. You need to be sure that the integrity of the data and how it's being collected and that all the permissions are there as well. And I'm sure we're going to have a horrible dive into the complexities of that later this afternoon.
Sure. And once so we've now got to the stage where we know what we're looking for. We've agreed with the providers what they're going to provide it with us. We've got the information coming in. So one of the things that quite often gets talked about is cohort analysis, segmentation, and things of that sort. What benefit does that bring? Is that a useful tool to?
I think before the mass digitization of data, then cohort analysis was a really good approach. Now I see it as pretty unnecessary. I think solutions exist out there that are very cost effective, that can absolutely talk to each individual on a personal basis. And just an example of where cohort analysis would fall down. I think we heard it earlier saying a 55-year-old who's been very, very, I guess, organised about their finances. They've saved a lot. They're at a position now where, tell me, I'm ready to retire. I want to hear all about my retirement options and things about pensions. But then take just as easily another 55-year-old's just got divorced. They're looking at extending their career by another 5-10 years. They're looking at short-term debt solutions. They're looking for maybe legal advice. You talk to them about pensions, it's going to fall on completely deaf ears. So from that perspective, the tools that are out there now, we can just as easily speak to people, I think, on an individual basis. And there's the horrible term of sort of a cohort of one, which is being sort of banded around. But it is as easy now as cohort analysis.
Sure, and I think it's a really interesting point around not making assumptions about somebody based on their age or seniority or any of those factors, because there's different things going on in different people's lives.
Absolutely.
So we've got to that idea that we don't need to, cohort analysis might not be the whole solution, but nonetheless, we've got all this data sitting here. What sort of insights can we realistically pull out of that data, and what can we do with them once we've got that?
I think, this is where we kind of move on to the solutioning side. But I think just as a general point, often when we're speaking to HR teams, there seems to be a bit of fear around lifting the lid, and I think once we discover we've got this problem, maybe the workforce has suddenly told us, we're all drowning in debt. I mean, are we obliged immediately to do something about it? And I think, there's got to be the understanding with senior management that this is the first step in a journey, that we're going to uncover these things in sort of a general strategy that we're going to solve over the coming years. So it's pulling out that information. It's looking at, okay, what's critical metrics that we want to change and improve for the business. And then it's saying, okay, so what is the best solution out there? So if it's debt, you can look at a variety of debt solutions. We talked about salary finance, things like that. We're a huge proponent, and we've talked about this already, and we've seen it on a couple of the Slido questions. We feel when it comes to financial well-being, the best solution is financial advice. That can be delivered digitally, and the key difference between that and, say, education, for argument's sake, is that it's giving someone a solution. I don't think you can magically expect someone after 30, 40 years of ignoring their finances to suddenly get engaged and say, you know what, I'm going to go online and I want to learn all about it. about the tax efficiencies of saving into a pension versus an ISA solution, these sorts of things. Personally, what I want someone to do is just have a look at my finances, then just tell me what to do. And you can only do that with financial advice, and because otherwise if you're not regulated to give advice, you're trying to do that under guidance, you're going to get into sticky territory.
Yeah, and it's an interesting link to what the previous presenter was talking about. John was talking about that people just want to know where to go and what to do. So I think, that's a really interesting sort of point I would guess to synthesize down a little bit and say, we promised people 6 things. What are the 6 pieces of data or the 6 golden rules that you would have?
Well, I think I'd probably just zoom out a bit. I mean, I don't want people to get too bogged down with like the 6 things. What I would say is you look at your business, but try and break it down to those 3. So what's the data points around my workforce's priorities? What is it that I really want to know there? And then it's okay. So let's pick the business critical sort of data points. What metrics I'm really trying to look at. And then finally, let's look at those metrics as we improve them over time. So it's not static metric in the final section where we're looking at performance and benchmarking. It's kind of looking at at their movement over time. And I think there's probably more than 6 within those 3. But I would encourage people not to start somewhere. And often people don't even get to step 1, which is they try and launch something before they understand what is it that my workforce really wants. I mean, we can all have a guess, but we're invariably wrong, I think we find. So I think you need to, making that first step, I think is probably what 90% of people need to probably do, is just to find out what are my workforce's priorities, what problems are there out in the market, and then what metrics, how does that feed into our business and the strategies that we have going forward, and then finally how's that going to be improved and benchmarked against our spend.
Sure, that's great. Thanks very much for that. Now, good mention of Slido there during the commentary. So perhaps if we can have a look up on the screen and see what we're getting down. Excellent question at the top there. So taboos and talking about financial knowledge and capturing that data in the first place. That's a great question. Yeah,
I think there's a really interesting study they were looking at, which was sort of how much people lie face to face. Especially with finances, and they found that the people who lied the most to financial advisors was when a middle-aged man was talking to a female financial advisor and trying to inflate their earnings or these sorts of things. So I think this is where digital is really good, because it's complete. It's a faceless thing. And you've got to stress that it's anonymized if you're doing it in the first step. And I think people just tend to be quite honest if there's not someone there judging them. So I think digital actually helps to break down a lot of these sort of taboos that we see.
Yeah, sure. And I think there's some interesting, and again, Martin mentioned it earlier, around using tools like EAPs for some more background information and data on what's going on, because I think it's, as you say, those sources of data that you can use more.
Yeah. I mean, it's always surprising how little, I guess, when we go and speak to EAP, that they've got amazing data there, which is usually ignored. I mean, I speak to very few people who EAP feeds into a board pack of some description. It's not particularly well used, and I think when we go in and speak to people who are launching financial wellbeing programs, I think EAP it's sort of the last line of defence, and what a lot of these programs seem to be keen to do is how can we stop people getting to EAP? It's great once they're there, but that's generally when it's too late. There's bailiffs at the door, that sort of thing. How can we help people before it gets to that emergency situation?
Sure, that's good. So there we go. How do you measure presenteeism? Goodness me. That's
a good question, and probably more suited to an HR seasoned HR. I mean, from ourselves, I mean, how do you measure presenteeism? I mean, we talk about, we've got a fantastic tool that we use internally, which is called Office Vibe. So that is through hundreds of questions that we ask the entire business. It's got really high engagement. We get presenteeism scores, but it's all elements that come into that. It's a hugely complex metric to measure that one.
It is really complicated, and I think a lot depends. I mean, particularly sort of pulling it down to sort of financial well-being, as well as understanding which parts that relate to the financial well-being.
I think that is a huge challenge as well, especially when you're trying to justify a spend with how do you come up with a good test as to we've put in these financial well-being projects that we've launched. How do you relate them back to sort of larger issues such as absenteeism or presenteeism? Because it's very rare that you have a financial well-being program going on in isolation. You would often have several other things going on, and it's okay. And I'm sure every supplier would claim it's them. Yeah. But how do you go about how do you actually sort of isolate the performance of each one? That's a bit more challenging.
Yeah, that's really hard to do. I mean, I guess if the overall movement is in the right direction, that's positive. But as you say, nailing down exactly what caused the change can be really tricky. So I'm just really looking behind me here. How do you, Wealth Wizards, typically help employers and employees using digital tools?
Well, I mean, our model is has a bit of a switch because we've had a lot of feedback saying, look, we love the fact you guys give advice, but the first thing, we just don't know what our workforce wants. So we've recently been going out and we've got a freemium tool which we give to employers completely free of charge. It is financial education, it's free financial education. An employee goes on, they answer 8 or 9 questions. It then gives them an action plan saying these are the 5 steps you need to take. We've then got a machine learning algorithm which looks at if they try and sort of reorder those priorities. And then we give them hints and tips and education around how they can hit that financial plan, and then we report back quarterly to the employer saying these are the top 3 priorities and this is what people did. And every time it's reprioritised, we then sort of update and improve, and our algorithm learns, so we get better and better the more people who use it. And then it might be that debt's the number 1 priority if it's we've got a lot of retail clients, in which case we might look for a third party if they want to go as far as to have a salary finance type solution. But if it's savings, if it's looking at day-to-day budgeting, retirement, these sorts of things, then we've got digital automated tools which give financial advice to the employee, and we found that's been a fantastic solution because it provides what people are after, which is just tell me what to do, and that's really what we're trying to do.
Sure, I've got a question that came up on the previous session actually, but I think is quite an interesting one to ask you. Is Google the enemy of financial well-being?
I don't know, because this is always the challenge I think anyone will find launching a financial education service to their employees is like, surely if someone's interested in being educated, they'll just Google it. And so it's quite a big challenge. And I think there's all sorts of useless information that you can find if you Google terms, and terrible advice out there. So I guess it's, in our mind, if people are actually that motivated to go out, what we find is people aren't even Googling financial terms. They're not even at that early stage where they're even interested. They may go and look at it over time as they hit specific life events where you do see a spike in engagement. But generally, I think Google is a way of finding decent information as long as it's coming from a good source and you can get your hands on it. It's a good way of sort of, I guess, collating relevant information more than anything else.
Sure, not entirely the enemy then. That's good. Yeah. It's good to know. So let's have a look up here. What have we got? Traditionally, liability, massive question. Ooh. Yes, yeah. Very big question. Great. So one to finish on actually is probably our last one.
I think there's been so much fear on it, but there's an interesting sort of, I guess, misunderstanding in this area. And so with a financial advisor, if you bring them in, the employee has a contract with the financial advisor. In the event that the financial advisor does something inappropriate, the employee's avenue of recourse is to go and effectively sue the financial advisor. Now, if you look at, say, a scenario which most people feel really comfortable with, which is a pension provider giving guidance solutions or just giving people education and guidance, if that education or guidance is incorrect, the avenue of recourse for the employee is to go directly to the employer. There's no I guess, sort of third party which is claiming responsibility. The employer decided to bring on board that guidance thing, and it's on their head be it. There's no kind of liability, and so really what I'm saying is advice sort of removes the liability and puts it onto the advisor. I mean, we accept that ourselves. I mean, the Ombudsman is where a client would go to if ever we did have a something that an employee, for argument's sake, thought wasn't appropriate. So, yeah, I think it actually removes liability from the employee, but I guess you could argue I'm a little bit biased, but there is legal opinion out there as well. So,
yeah, absolutely, and I think it's an important point, and it's a shame to remove that entirely from the equation for employees. So, Phil, we're run out of time. Thank you very much indeed. It's been great talking to you today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.